I'm Siobhan.
And this is She, They, Just Like Me.
For real.
Hey, girl.
Hey, girl, how you doing?
I'm doing great. And guess what? We're not alone.
What?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have told you ahead of time. We know her as Beatrice. You may know her as Videomancer on Twitter. Or if you have listened to the show before, happy birthday, Mr. Baskets, joining us today on the podcast. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, hey. Nice to be here.
We really appreciate it.
I appreciate the introduction.
Siobhan is a huge fan.
Yes, I'm so normal right now.
You seem very normal.
See, that's what I said. We wanted to invite you on to talk about a project that was very special to you, as is the format of the show typically, but also just, shoot the shit, chat a bit about everything you've got going on.
Well, in terms of what we're going to look at, I believe, as cliche as it may be, I picked the first full length by 100 gecs, which is just 1,000 gecs.
It's only 1,000 gecs.
They've gone up by quite a bit since then. It just came out in this year that was very interesting for me and probably a lot of other people. Personally, in my, at least the most recent iteration of what I might call a career, was very influential.
I can imagine so. I mean, I remember when this came out, and it was kind of like a shock because I don't think anyone had really been exposed to music like this. I mean, I remember like the first time like hearing Money Machine like on my Twitter TL, I was like, I can't believe music even sounds like this. You know what I mean? It's like insane.
There was a time at some point in the past decade where I just decided that whatever gave my brain the good brain chemicals was probably worth, listening to. And there's been a crossover between like things that do that good and make, certain music connoisseurs angry that other people like it. And that's like usually my sweet spot for things that are real good.
I think it was one of the most divisive things I've come across in music. Like, it was definitely one of those, you either absolutely love this or you 100% hate this and you think it's the worst thing you've ever heard.
In terms of what we know it, yeah.
Hell yeah. Yeah, and it sort of popularized hyperpop too, right? Like, as a genre, this is probably the most defining record. Yeah, as we know it, yeah. Because I'm sure,
It was my introduction.
Yeah, because I'm sure there was hyperpop before this that, was, from what I understand, descended from nightcore and like other kinds of electronic music. But, as we know it, I think this is like sort of the defining record, right?
Right. And it's one of those interesting cases where there's like a whole lot of ancestry there with a lot of different artists, especially on the PC Music label and stuff in that ballpark. Since, 100 gecs popularized it, they're just going to be forever associated with like bringing that sort of mainstream for a bit there.
You've talked a little bit about your relationship with this record. I definitely hear its influence on a lot of your music as well, especially your full length Everything You Want, I think is very hyperpop influenced along this line.
Going back and listening to it recently, just to review for this, I realized a couple things, one of which was what I had already known, which was that rather than taking a huge amount of inspiration from 100 gecs specifically, I think we both draw a lot on like the weirdly internet specific birth of like emo and scene music back in the late 2000s. Stuff like, I mean, my main one was Family Force 5, but I know a lot of people listen to stuff like Millionaires and Cobra Starship and Hello Goodbye and just a bunch of stuff that was MySpace music is kind of what me and my friends used to call it. But also combine that with, and I might be dating myself a little bit here, but like the era of YouTube I grew up on was the AMV Nightcore Eurobeat music, and listening to 100 gecs when 1,000 gecs came out was like this weird sort of like being given permission to do the kind of stuff that I've always wanted to since I was a teenager. Like seeing however many million views on Money Machine was like, I don't have to drastically change the kind of music I want to make for it to be successful. Maybe I'll give this a go.
You just got Love Addict stuck in my head, by the way. I haven't thought about Family Force 5 in probably a good decade, so thank you for that.
That is such a good album. I have multiple copies of that album. I've got like the original release, a pre-release version with an extra song.
Oh my gosh.
Because my dad used to work at a Christian bookstore, and they got like this big box full of CDs that were put in the displays, and then when the album came out, they got cycled out. Hidden away on my hard drive, I've got the pre-Goatee Records release version of Business Up Front Party in the back with like the old jank mixes.
Oh, I think it's funny how all of us have incredible Christian backstory of some sort. Like you with Family Force 5. Mine was Five Iron Frenzy. I don't know if you've listened to them back in the day.
Not as much as I would have liked to, but...
The old ska punk.
Yeah. No, they were definitely in my circle.
You reminded me, too, talking about MySpace music. I know they're not in favor anymore because of a lot of unsavory personalities involved, let's just say. But you might be able to point to Mindless Self-Indulgence as kind of like an early... influence on what kind of would become that sound too.
We had like our own Mindless Self-Indulgence in Minnesota, which I believe is currently known as Screaming Mechanical Brain. I don't know if you've listened to them at all, but
I hadn't heard of them, but I will now.
It is basically our like hometown Mindless Self-Indulgence.
My like cringe like Christian like music growing up was MXPX.
Oh,
I was, like,
yeah,
such a huge fan of them.
MXPX is really good.
Yeah, but that's the Christian angle. Like at this point in my life is, you know, it's a challenging era of my life that I'm still processing, I suppose. But there was some fucking good music that came out of that.
You know what's interesting? I've noticed. I was also for a number of years really into Christian metal. And it seems like over the past, I don't know, not quite a decade, but around a decade-ish, there's been like this divide and shift between different artists. And it seems like a lot of the metal ones have gone more to the right, we'll say.
Yeah.
But a lot of the like serious... like more punk artists, you know, like Five Iron Frenzy, sort of stood their ground on a lot of issues, whereas the rougher alternative members of the community seem to be a little bit, not that I would call out, say, for example, the lead vocalist of Impending Doom having a bunch of Thin Blue Line stuff on his Instagram profile a few years back, but you know.
The only one that came to mind to me was Skillet, because I'm not very familiar with the scene.
Relient K, anyone?
Oh, yeah. For sure.
I don't know if it shows, but, like, Relient K is, like, for many years, probably would be my Spotify #1 currently if you could count, like, CD and tape listens.
That's incredible. Yeah.
It may or may not show in my album writing just exactly how much Relient K I listened to. And I was worried about them for a while, given how some Christian artists can just be a little bit quiet. But going to a show of theirs a couple years ago and having Semler open and having the crowd react as well as they did to Semler and their comment about let Bob and Larry be gay made me feel like actually Relient K concert is still a safe place for me, which is cool.
Oh my god, that's excellent news, because I would love to see them live, honestly. You made a point earlier about like the metal Christian artists going like leaning more right, and like the punk Christian artists leaning more left. I think that's also kind of a general divide between those genres. Like, you know, I've been trying to get more into like progressive metal over the years, and I found that like every single time I have to like do a deep dive onto every single member of the band to be like, are you a fascist? Like,
I guess it's not like a huge surprise that artists in an extreme musical genre would have otherwise extreme views, but it's always very interesting to try and guess which side they're going to land on.
I looked up Screaming Mechanical Brain, by the way, and it also brought up Screaming Monkey Boner as a. Is that the same band?
That is the same band.
Okay.
But, you know, in order to get into certain venues or whatever, they had to tone it down just a little bit.
Of course.
Oh my god.
I understand.
Screaming Monkey Boner that goes fucking hard, I have to say.
I can't wait to listen to these albums. I bet they're dope.
Yeah, hell yeah.
So 100 gecs. Yeah, I remember, I would say Money Machine was the first introduction to them for me also. I played the video for my friend who is, you know, big time metal guy, and halfway through just looks at me and goes, "Am I supposed to hate this?" And I was like, hold on. And by the end, where it was just that boom, like loud, he goes, "Okay, well, I like this." I was like, okay, well, you know, there's something for everybody then.
Yeah, oh my god. But I think that's kind of the thing with them, is that like there's something for everyone, but they also kind of go out of their way to be like really abrasive, which I really like personally. It's like I love when girls are annoying, you know, that's my favorite thing. It's interesting and really cool how they've managed to like have so much success by being like so like particular and unique in their sound.
I was super surprised to see them opening for My Chemical Romance a couple years ago. We were lucky enough to actually catch, and that crowd had no idea what to make of them and did not seem to really appreciate them being there.
That's so interesting, because I would assume that like the crowd for MCR would also like 100 gecs, because like every MCR fan I know is also like big into like 100 gecs, Storing Electra, like, you know, that kind of like,
oh god,
you know, queer hyperpop. But maybe just not in Atlanta. I don't know.
I will say the one thing that I always tell people from that show, which was one of the coolest in hindsight, because they were playing songs from 10,000 gecs, but we wouldn't know it yet. They do the
You're never gonna make it. It's impossible.
And then they go into Hollywood Baby with the, you know, you won't make it in Hollywood. So it's like that transition was like, ooh, they knew what they were doing.
It sounds like it would have been so much fun to be at.
I mean, it was for me, who was a fan, but it didn't really seem like it was really vibing with a bunch of people there. Maybe it was because we were also like on the field, like on the lawn seats, so we were kind of far away. So maybe the people up close were digging it.
It is possible. I've loved MCR for a long time, but at the same time, they are also one of the more, I don't necessarily want to say palatable bands of that genre, but like there's a reason they're as big as they are. And there's a lot of stuff in that area that's harder to get into. So it feels to me as if there's sort of a bit of a filter there where 100 gecs might not fit the mold of the greater audience. But like everybody I know who's into MCR is also into 100 gecs.
You did remind me, though. Remember when I think MCR was voted like the worst band by Kerrang, and then the next year was voted the best band by Kerrang? So it's like, it looks like 100 gecs and MCR kind of ran the same gauntlet of critics absolutely hate this, they don't get it, to, oh, okay, now the kids are into it, now we love it suddenly.
The classic polarizing artist.
It's not like they were doing anything super new, though. I mean, I guess, like, emo had already been a thing. I guess they were just more, I don't know. I guess, like you said, like, they were made up, they were cute, and I guess maybe critics didn't like cute. It's like, oh, they're more poppy, they're more, you know, for the teeny bopper audience, when it's like, I mean, if you listen to the albums, though, they're fucking fire.
Yeah, I also want to say there's probably something to do with, like, queer phobia, because, you know, like, MCR, like, when they came out, were, like, a very queer band for, like, the scene they were in and what they were doing, and they really leaned into it a lot. It was very cool and affirming, like, for me as like a young person who knew like something was up with me, to feel like that was, things are going to be okay, right? But I could also see that, like, music critics from that era, especially rock critics, wouldn't really, like them for that reason.
They scared me for that reason, because I was closeted and because I did think they were attractive, and I had to save my own, self-preservation, had to act like I hated them and, I don't like this shit. And I went years and years without listening to them because I had that, it wasn't even a misconception. It's like, I honestly didn't even give them a fucking chance. I saw the I'm Not Okay video and I made my decision that, okay, I can't like this because people are going to think I'm gay, and they'd be right.
Yeah. They would be right.
They would be right. But I'm glad I eventually did come around because, very near flawless discography. One of the few bands I could say that really not many skips, if any.
Yeah, real shit. Famously, they're always wearing a lot of makeup, aesthetically, and I also remember hearing that at the time it was not common for skinny jeans to be made for men, so they would wear women's jeans and things like that.
Mood.
Which, yeah, I fucking love that. So yeah, 100 gecs.
Yeah.
The record 1000 gecs, it starts with a banger, 745 Sticky. What do we have to say about this track?
That was my alarm for most of 2020.
Oh shit. Was it for 745?
Oh, I don't think I ever got up that early. Unless there was, if I had a gig in the cities and I had to be there at 10 a.m. or something, maybe I'd be up by, I don't know. I really connected with it because the whole vibe of it, independence, but in a way that is, I don't know, not necessarily a cool way, but we're doing what we need to get by. And that really resonated with me for most of that year. I would say it was an interesting year to be someone self-employed that worked in primarily live venues.
Yeah, I imagine so. When you have to wake up early and you're doing a lot of things with malicious compliance, where you're well, I have to do this, but I don't have to do it happy. You know what I mean? I do like that attitude. It is a good morning song, Plus, throwing money in the oven, great fucking line.
I know we're not talking about it specifically, but the 1000 gecs and the Tree of Clues, the remix album with Injury Reserve remix and another remix with Black Dresses, you couldn't get two different artists than Injury Reserve, just this hard, gruff hip-hop group, and Black Dresses, which again, is also hard and abrasive, but from a different point of view.
Absolutely. The Black Dresses remix goes so fucking hard, I must say.
Then Money Machine, which I guess could have been the introduction, but I guess everyone kind of already heard it by that point. Money Machine's a fucking great track. The insulting intro is still super highly quotable even 5 years later. Oh
my god, that's so true. I say that to my fucking coworkers all the time. Hey, little piss baby.
You never called me a piss baby. What the fuck?
I remember for at least several months, probably longer, after that was you talk a big game for someone with such a small truck, was just embedded into my friend group for the next good while.
I fucking love that too, especially as a Texan girl. The aesthetic of trucks has always been a little bit alluring to me, but it's I feel before this song it was kind of cringe for me to talk about that, because it was trucks are mostly associated with the worst people alive, but there is something cool and sexy about a big truck.
I think it definitely helped that the song came out in an era of my particular group of friends who are, weirdly enough, mostly a lot of queer car dudes, but it came in this era of realization of now hang on, the problem with giant trucks is mostly that it's either hugely wasteful brand new Ford F-150s, or we associate them with the worst kid at our high school and their Confederate flag in the back. There is a certain vibe about getting into a 2004 Yukon that barely functions and riding around blasting, whatever music you may have at the time out of the extremely cheap subwoofers that you bought.
I'd hate to say it, but mudding is really fun, and you gotta have a lift kit to do that, 4-wheel drive, off-road tires, let's fucking go.
See, I don't know if we had any big Confederate flag truck kids, but we definitely did have bring in your fucking Wrangler with the doors off on Monday with mud completely splattering the sides.
2020 was the year that me and a couple friends, in a desperate effort to exist somewhere that wasn't inside our houses, got into VR. And one of the big things that we all did was American Truck Simulator.
Oh, shit.
Nice.
The group of people that I hang around currently exists because my roommate at the time was doing trucking streams on Twitch. Somebody asked to join our Discord, and then we let them, and then eventually they moved to the state and bought a house with somebody here, and they just sort of had this group of, mildly queer people converge around a Discord server that started on a trucking stream. There was just a big sort of weird culture shift that has resulted in not only the music I listen to and the friends that my friends also listen to, but also just like the way that my life is now.
I definitely got a VR vibe from listening to Everything You Want. It wasn't Truck Simulator, though, exactly. That wasn't the first game I'd go with.
While I was working on that album, the thing that I had, I was playing most was Boneworks. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with that, but it is.
I have not heard of that one.
It is kind of like the vibe is like a weird, desolate Half-Life 2 kind of thing. The story is very meta. It's like VR within VR within VR. If you want like an interesting full game to play through that feels like a video game and not just a tech demo, Boneworks is really good for that.
I mean, I don't know if I'm ready to drop like, $1,000 in an entire room in my apartment for VR, but...
That's true. You can get it cheaper, but you will have to sell a part of your soul to Facebook, I think.
Oh, true. Money Machine is like always like whenever I'm trying to get like the uninitiated into 100 gecs, it's always the go-to song, I assume, I've never seen them in concert, but I would assume that this is probably their closer. You know what I mean? This is like the 100 gecs song in many ways. And I also remember thinking like, and this being like part of the conversation when it came out, but like, what does Feel So Clean Like a Money Machine even mean? Like,
I think my favorite part about that song is that whether it means anything or not, it doesn't have to mean anything. The lyrics of your chorus or hook or whatever just kind of have to represent a feeling. And whether it makes any literal or even grammatical sense does not have that much of an effect on whether the song is good or not.
Yeah, I definitely feel that, especially in regards to this song. I mean, it's definitely it's provocative, it gets the people going kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you hear it and you know what they're going for, even if you couldn't describe it.
One of the things that, I noticed, like just looking at like the lyrics between like this song and the previous one, 745 Sticky, is that there's a lot to do with sleep deprivation, which is relatable because this is like kind of what sleep deprivation feels like, like unhinged in like a really significant way.
I think that was one of the reasons I related really hard to the majority of the album. I was going to mention earlier how it kind of has like a punk edge, but I think the overall vibe more than just punk is sort of existing as a disaster and that being actually fine.
Yeah, 100%. And that's probably one reason why like it appeals so much to like a lot of trans women, beyond the fact that, Laura Less is one of us, is that like there's like big girl rot vibes to it. You know what I mean?
Especially on 100 Decibel Cloud.
Oh God. Speaking of which, I think that's the next track, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
800 Decibel Cloud was my number one for 2020. And like the rest of the album was also spread out between there and number 12, I think. So like most of the songs were on there at the top, but something about this one specifically spoke to me a lot.
That actually makes so much sense to me, because like, you know, I think generally like one of the things about 100 gecs is that a lot of their lyrics have this like ironic distance to them. That's kind of like the place they seem to write from, where, you know, they can be emotionally expressive. There's always this like space between, you know, their emotions and what they're saying, where I think one of the things that I get from a lot of your music is that there's not that same kind of distance, that like you write from a place from, you know, what I can see, that is very close to your heart. And this is probably the closest they get to that place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I could definitely see that with the lyrics on this one.
Very emotionally expressive in a way that they don't often do, at least the first half.
Well,
yeah.
The second half is sort of like, I don't know, there's a certain level of writing that is like in a lot of the music that I've listened to over the past however many years, which is sort of like post-irony. Like a long time ago, some of the bands that I listened to were like super ironic or sarcastic about, you know, writing fun, poppy party music. And then some of them started getting like really into it. And then eventually you arrive at a point where it's like, no, we actually are kind of just all doing these things, but we're going to write about it in the most fun way possible.
Yeah, like you mentioned Hello Goodbye earlier as like sort of an influence on this genre as well as like your music. And I think that they're very much like that.
Yeah.
Where, you know, they write fun poppy music, but there is this like, you know, deeply emotional edge that can move you, you know?
I think that's also something that appears in one of my bigger influences of, you know, however long they've been a thing. But Owl City writes a lot of stuff that sounds like pop nonsense, but then if you like listen closely, you can sort of just feel the sincere vibes underneath it, which is
100%
very different than like, you know, this particular kind of music, but I think it comes from a similar place.
Speaking of which, I think on the episode where we talked about Everything You Want, I compared your song Aligned to what's the big Owl City song?
Fireflies.
Fireflies, yeah. I said like that song is like if Fireflies was about like lesbian yearning.
There was something about Fireflies. Like, that was another one of the defining moments of my musical career, because I almost gave up when I heard the entire Ocean Eyes album, because I was like, oh, somebody's done it already. All the things that I wanted to do, somebody has made this music.
Oh, shit.
And I can either try and delve into it as much as possible and see what happens, or just like give up because someone has already perfected it. Owl City and Reliant K are two of the comparisons I'm never going to get away from. I don't think, just because it's so deeply ingrained.
I'd kind of prefer your music, honestly. There's like more, I don't know, it's more relatable to me personally, I guess.
It did take me a while. Like I will say this was over a decade ago at this point. The stuff that I put out then was a lot more derivative. It does feel like, at least on the last album, I finally succeeded in, you know, adding some of my own personal self into something versus just making the kind of music I like listening to.
I was going to say there's a big shift, even if it's just like a couple of years apart from the self-titled and Everything You Want. I could definitely pick up on the influences on the self-titled album, but there's such a significant shift in just a short amount of time that I was very curious about, especially with how Everything You Want. We talked about it in the review, how it does a lot of with these samples that kind of make you feel like this is just going to be a very jokey album. It's very fun and carefree, but then the album just ends up being very sad, but still manages to throw a couple like lighthearted samples at you along the way. that I was curious what led to that shift towards what we hear on Everything You Want.
I do think, I mean, this is one of the reasons that I brought up, the album, 1,000 gecs, was because that was sort of the point where I realized I can just sort of do whatever, and there's a possibility that, people might actually still listen. And I think the first time I had that, like, the more profound realization of that was back when I first listened to Sophie, and I was like, there's like a queer trans person can be successful at making the music they want to make. And then sort of had that realization again with 100 gecs where it's like, a trans person can make the kind of music that I want to make. That's ridiculous and over the top and maximalist, and also be successful. This is interesting. Not that Sophie isn't already very over the top and maximal in most cases, but it was a much more polished sound.
Yeah, like Sophie is a lot more like industrial, where this is a lot more like pop and punk and emo influenced for sure, which is I think more for like where you come from.
One of the things that I sort of wanted to explore on the album was I will just listen to whatever gives me the good brain chemicals and not let anything else matter. And I think when making Everything You Want, that was sort of the idea, like taking that further to like, if something that I do in my DAW feels good and fun, don't listen to the voice that's like, oh, you can't put that here. That's too silly. That'll take people out of it. Whatever that may be. And then just started trying to find the purest form of self-expression that I could. But also at the same time, there's stuff where there's like somewhere in the opening of the intro, there is the I miss my wife tales, I miss her a lot sample, which is like funny and goofy, but also is like, oh no, me and the person in this album is largely based around bonded over our mutual love of Sonic and that quote in particular. Oh. And it's like, yes, it's goofy fun, but also all of the stuff on the album is there for a reason, I guess. Oh, and specifically, I think it's fun to toss all of that in there with zero context and just see how it feels to other people. Like, does it come through, or are people entirely lost? Does it matter? It's a bit of an experiment, but I had a lot of fun with it. And I feel like when you put that much into something, whether or not it comes across on like a textual level, the subtext you can vibe with, hopefully, anyways.
I think it's the most fun I've had listening to a very sad album, so it definitely ticks both boxes.
Yeah. Sad but really fun is a great way to describe that record for sure. And yeah, the Sonic samples were so good. I didn't grow up with Sonic, but I have a lot of friends that I made in my adult life who did, so I like became familiar with the canon of Sonic, if you would. That was always really interesting because, like, to me, like Sonic represents like cringe but wholesome and like earnest, which I think is like very much what I'm trying to be like in my life currently. I'm trying to really embrace that, right? And I think that there's something to be said too about that being a part of like the process of transitioning to, is like sort of embracing parts of yourself that you may have hidden because like you were afraid that people wouldn't like them, but it's earnest and real, and it like makes you happy, Definitely
big kill the part of you that cringes.
Yes.
Was a big turning point in the transition of just like...
kind of have to.
So much.
To tie these two things together in as weird of a way as I possibly can. I think growing up as, a pastor's kid in the rural Midwest, the first time I ever encountered something that made me start questioning things was like reading late at night when everybody else was asleep and I had either stayed up or snuck up to get back on the internet, reading like a Sonic slash fic and being like, this is so sweet and beautiful. I don't see how this could be evil. Being like the turning point for the slow drip feed of queerness into myself as a person over time was like weird. But like you do eventually have to start having those thoughts of like, well, okay, is all of these things that I am cringing about or ashamed of or whatever like legitimate? Or is this just these weird expectations I've had placed on me forever that are the source of it? And that's like a big process of the, queerness or transness realization process, I think.
For me, it goes back to MCR about how, like, yeah, I found it cringe at the time, but it was mainly because I was afraid of allowing myself to enjoy it. And that kind of goes towards a lot of, I guess, kind of what you come across as trans culture on Twitter or on YouTube. Me from 10 or so years ago would probably find most of it cringe. But, it's... Once you realize that, the let people enjoy things is also another thing of just, like, what fucking harm is it doing? Like, just fucking enjoy it. Like, does it make you happy? Do you get enjoyment out of it? Then just fucking roll with it. Like, why fight that feeling? Yeah. Which goes back towards fighting the feeling of wanting to transition anyway. Of just, it all kind of ties together.
I remember having... And it wasn't necessarily specifically cringe, but it was something cringe adjacent when I was growing up, and even throughout like college and post-college and different stages of life, where I would see something that was like, something in me objectively enjoys this, but I'm super uncomfortable with it. And then going back through the realization process that I had over 2018, 2019 and revisiting everything, like 75-80% of the time it was like, oh, this is like a hyper feminine thing that I really enjoyed. But that made me very uncomfortable at the time because like it was either, oh, I was taught I shouldn't like this, or it's something that I want and can't have, or, any number of things where it was like, oh, the source of this cringe or cringe adjacent feeling is not this thing itself. It is me and somebody else who has instilled a feeling in me that makes me uncomfortable with this rather than anything innate.
Yeah, like people's expectations of what you should be versus what you want to be or what you are, right? That deeply resonates with me. And God, I know we're supposed to be talking about 100 gecs, but I can't help but bring up more of your music, B. The song She's Been Waiting off your self-titled is like so important to me too, as like a song about like, repressing and wanting to like come out and then finally doing it. Ignorance appealing, preferable to feeling. And just that whole bend, it gets the waterworks going for me for real for that same reason.
I like to think, right, like when I had my realizations in, 2017, 2018 or whatever, that I was instantly like, that's it. I'm going to face this now and deal with it and not, go on ignoring it. But how many times had I done that before, like subconsciously? Because the feeling was that like it wasn't 0 times. I was talking about the sneaking off late at night to go on the internet, and I remember one of the things that I did a lot was read like web comics that my, conservative parents wouldn't have approved of. One of which was, one that I was obsessed with called Misfile, about a stoner angel who had misplaced a couple files and turned somebody into a girl, and like, wow. Totally not examining any of the feelings of obsession I had with that comic for more than a decade, I think.
Damn.
Man, I didn't even know any of that was an option.
Oh my God. Just reading that and being like, yeah, still cis though.
The I didn't have the words art of just like, feel if 10, maybe even 20 years ago, if someone were to just explain it to me in words that I could have understood and just been like, yeah, this is a normal thing that people do, it probably would have clicked long before for me. But because there wasn't the representation, it wasn't normalized, that it didn't even come up on my brain at all as an option. I'm just like, no, of course not. Like, I don't know anybody that's trans, so it must be this weird thing that's only on TV and movies. You know, like, it's this thing that writers cooked up, but I couldn't possibly do that.
When I grew up and when Moth grew up, like, being a trans person was like this weird fringe thing on like the margins of society that absolutely was not an option. And like, my journey was a lot of unpacking that, especially because I also grew up very religious. It was like very, very difficult to do that, you know. I got a lot of younger trans friends these days, and I'm a little bit envious of their like growing up not necessarily as much in that environment and being able to have their realizations, their moments like sooner. But, you know, hey, we all got here eventually, right?
I feel like there's always going to be a little bit bare minimum trauma associated with the whole idea of how long it took you to realize and whether or not you were even given the opportunity to have the ability to understand all of that. Because, like, not only was... I mean, depending on where you grew up and how conservative it was, that the idea might never have been presented even once. Where I grew up, like, there wasn't a huge, loud section of the particular denomination that we were in that was against, you know, queer people or whatever, but it was to the point where it was just never talked about. Like, their solution to we're not going to be loud and bigoted is we're not going to say anything at all ever, which is, you know, then brings with it another host of issues.
Yeah, like a quiet oppression, an omission of queerness.
The environment that I grew up in was primarily like early 2000s Radio Disney era. There wasn't really any sort of queer representation, like, at all. And if it was something that was extremely subversive and like very either like countercultural or, I mean, I guess that's one of the reasons that the internet was a big deal for me at the time, was because it was a space that wasn't really controlled by all the people with all the money at the time. People would just say what they wanted to and be who they wanted to.
It's so funny that you mentioned Radio Disney of all things, because I was very intimidated by all the like the hit stations, because like they played a whole bunch of different stuff and it was an FM station, so I had all the commercials, and I don't know, it just felt like a lot to me. But something about Radio Disney felt inviting, and it was a very chill kind of vibe, and that was really the first place I ever like felt comfortable listening to like the pop music that was quote unquote for girls, you know, like I tweeted about it a few days ago, and it clicked with a few people because it was one of these like sleeper hits. But the song "C'est la vie" by Bewitched was just this catchy little song with a river dance break in the middle of it. But like it wasn't getting play on like the big time stations or whatever. But like between Radio Disney and like Now albums from back in the day, because there's no way I could like tell my parents, hey, I want a Spice Girls CD, you know, without getting like a sideways glance or something. But you could get a Now CD and there's a Spice Girls song on it, and you could just be like, no, I'm listening to Sublime, you know?
Oh my God. Also, the Now, that's what I call music CDs, just a forgotten era of like pop culture for sure. Like the kids these days don't even know. Okay,
we're gonna kids these days on the She They Pod.
Oh, we are always kids these daysing. And we're not even that old anyway.
No, not at all.
Get us back to the record. The next song on the album is I Need Help Immediately, which is mostly an instrumental track, but I particularly love just how fucking crazy and like manic it is almost.
It's very good. It's just a bunch of noises, pleasant and unpleasant, in a very good selection.
Yeah, absolutely. And God, I think it's the song where like there's just like a random bark like in it, foreseeing the cultural dominance of puppy girls right there.
They knew.
I
will say, I talked earlier about how, myself and, Lorelei Still and Brady have a lot of the same influences, I think. But something I specifically got from this album is my love of inserting, like having really loud, dissonant parts that are just full of sound effects and then having a little dropout for like focus on one little piece of a sound effect. I don't know. It's fun to know that your audience definitely heard that one little thing. I think the one I get commented on the most is there is the one note from Seabat in Faster in the breakdown area.
Oh my God. Yes. Holy shit. I think I like told Moth about that in our review, and like she hadn't even noticed it, but I was like, oh no, that's Seabat for sure.
It's a fun game to find like what's the absolute shortest clip that I can find of something that will be 100% recognizable. I had seen some success with like the Sorry That I'm Like This EP because of like TikTok and the music videos that I put up there. But prior to that, there was a large level of just like, I'm just going to throw whatever on here. Like nobody is ever going to listen to this music. Why don't I take this random TikTok and use it as this extremely long sample almost as a producer tag?
It's its own little reward if you do recognize a little sample. Like, ooh, I know what that was. You reminded me before talking about just like loud, cacophonous music. There's a handful of genres that have become, for better or worse, kind of cliche to trans culture. And I feel like before hyperpop kind of became one of the big staples, that just like harsh noise was very popular, that it feels like 100 gecs just kind of fit into that mold pretty easily. Like they had a little bit of that, but they were still also like a little weird and quirky. So like if you weren't super into the loud noises, it wasn't all the time, but it was in there if you were into that. So it definitely kind of tipped its toes into that arena, which I like about it.
The next song on the album is the banger Stupid Horse.
Love Stupid Horse.
Yeah, what do we have to say about this one?
I think this is actually the one that got me into 100 gecs. Like this, seeing
me too.
Somebody make what was essentially a flash animation of this song was what made me go, oh, I should look up more of 100 gecs, and then got me to Money Machine, specifically the music video. I think they've expanded a lot on the sound of this one on 10,000 gecs. Like this is the song on this first album where the ska influences are most apparent.
Yeah,
it's basically a ska song with like several pick it ups,
Yeah,
yes,
the up picking on the clean guitar and everything else that comes with it. I think that's, at least for me, the part that sets apart 100 gecs from just, whatever other typical or stereotypical hyperpop music came out in that time.
I think this one really stood out to me as like a favorite on it because it was a sillier one. It had the ska, which is cheat code for me anyway. It had that Scotty Doesn't Know riff sample, the durna 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 durna, which is like, if you recognize that right away, it's fun. And just I can't replicate it. Like, this is a vibe. This is such a fun fucking song. Like, it's impossible to not enjoy that one.
It's probably the most guitar-driven song on this record, but I think, in 10,000 gecs, there's like a lot more guitar-driven songs, which is a sound that I think they should lean into a little bit more.
I love it.
Because it's fun to, like, I love the guitar, and it's not just because I play a little. It's just such a good sound to add with all the electronic stuff going on with it.
especially when it's like over modulated like this, where it's just like it's clipping and it's loud and it's nasty. I love that.
Yeah, really crunchy in parts, which I appreciate. I like a crunchy guitar, you know.
Love a good crunch.
I do think one of the things about this album's whole sort of sonic fingerprint is that it is not, it's weird because it's not necessarily abrasive, right? Like some of the sound is clearly designed to be loud and distorted and whatever. But on some songs like these, it's subtler and crunchier and more fun. I don't necessarily know how to describe it except for the vibe is it's clearly made by people who know how to make really good music and are just kind of having fun with the writing and the production and the mixing, and like none of it was taken too seriously, and that vibe sort of just flows throughout the whole thing.
The next track on this record is I Would Never Stop You.
In just the most AOL Instant Messenger screen name font.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
This is definitely one that is like the most, I don't know, listening to this made me feel like when I first listened to the album, made me feel, oh, this isn't just like certain people adopting the aesthetics of the era. Like, this is a song clearly by somebody who existed on, you know, YouTube during the AMV Nightcore era.
It's very MySpace, you know, and I think that's sort of like a defining element of like the aesthetics of 100 gecs. I mean, especially in their like music videos, is that it all feels like that era to me, that like web 2.0 kind of like time, which is very nostalgic for me. And it's also one of the things like I wonder why like a lot of the like younger like trans women that I like am friends with are like not as much of a fan of 100 gecs as like, you know, trans women around our age. And I think part of that is because they didn't have a MySpace, like they didn't grow up in that time. So there's no nostalgia element to the aesthetic to them. They just see it as like, you know, they don't connect with it as much, I think. That's at least my personal take.
I do think that does make this, I don't know if I want to say necessarily one of the weaker songs on the album, but I think there's a whole lot of this album that stands alone, whereas this one doesn't hit quite as hard if you don't have that nostalgia.
Yeah, like this song makes me want to like go around on the roller rink. You know what I mean?
We were talking about having a roller skating date coming up soon, and I have not ever successfully roller skated, so
you're probably gonna fall down a lot, but that's okay because you're tiny.
That is true.
You don't have far to fall.
Yeah, good point.
I want to dive into the lyrics, but there's not that much, you know. It's a lot of like you know, like repeating the same kind of like lines and stuff like that, but that's also like calling back to like sort of that era of music where, you know, that era of like electronic music especially, where it was just about these sort of like loops.
We've got like some collaborative playlists between me and some people I know and my roommate and whatnot, and there's one of them that is just there was an era where it was like you needed a certain kick and a certain bass, and you had to, for optimal, you had to have like one deep voice guy and one really high voiced woman. Like
Barbie Girl.
Yeah, Barbie Girl's a good one, but there was a whole genre of like Eurobeat that didn't make any sense and didn't need to. You just had to have a certain vibe, and the words were not important.
Yeah, women are my favorite guy.
Yeah.
There's a number of songs on this album that sort of fall into that genre of like, if you are attempting to analyze the lyrics, you may be missing the point.
It's very vibes based.
It is, and I like that. I think personally for me it was encouraging because one of the hardest processes for the lyric writing, for me at least, has always been getting a good hook from my head into a song and surviving the phase where I have to write it down on paper or in a notes app and actually look at it with my eyes, because there's so many lyrics that just don't work when you're reading them off of a page or a screen, but then do when you hook it up with the other vibes and emotions and melodies and whatnot. And going through this album was the encouragement I needed at the time to to get through that not so great on paper phase of lyrics.
It is so interesting for you to say that, because I personally think, you know, your lyrics are like some of the strongest parts of your music, to be honest. Like, I can kind of understand that, having like written some in the past where there's that period of like, this is not done. This is like a little like cringe for me to look at, but like I'm trying to like sort of take the stone and polish it into something. I wanted to keep this expressive element while being like interesting.
The one I just put out something like last week, I think it was, and I've got
Yes, you did.
the Google Keep notes, and if I go on the version history, it was April 24th. I got out of bed at 5:48 a.m. to go write down, do you think it's a problem that I don't need you to love me back? And just looking at that on here, it's like, that's just a sentence. It's not aesthetically pleasing or, you know, particularly profound or whatever, but like putting it to the melody with the rest of the chord progression is like, okay, maybe that is something. You know, the pure expression of an emotion is enough to carry it, whether or not it's great lyrics or not.
It's earnest and emotionally expressive in a very deep way. I mean, I was tweeting about it like after you released it, but that song made me cry like a lot, because I have been there so many times, you know, and it's just the pure expressiveness of it, you know.
Every once in a while, you know, I saw a therapist for like 5 years and then stopped and haven't in a while. So sometimes I got to check in and just go over everything to make sure things are still cool. And one of the sessions I was just doing some thinking, I ended up in an area of like, why was communication so terrible at the end of that one relationship? And then I thought to myself, oh, now hang on, maybe this person had gone through a lot of relationships where simply checking out and like going and doing their own thing was enough to make the other person be like, oh, okay, so I guess it's over then, because if I'm not getting anything out of it, I don't want to hang around. But like, I don't know if that works on me.
Yeah, it does not work on me either. Like,
the themes of the song are like trying to explore, is that fine actually? Or is that something that I have been conditioned to be? Like, is it cool that that's a thing? Or should I be expecting a lot more all the time from everything?
Yeah, God, that's, very deeply resonant to me. That is also how my last relationship ended, was the other person kind of checked out and I just kind of waited around for a really long time for them to get it together for me. But yeah, that's like a real thing.
The track board, the whole concept is basically just like, maybe give me a heads up, actually.
Yeah, tell me.
Like, things don't last forever. That's fine. But like, if you know it's over, well, maybe don't let me continue investing time and energy and whatever.
If you're gonna leave the apartment and start living with friends and then tell me 3 months later, oh, hey, by the way, hey, you know.
Like,
maybe
I could have used that time for other stuff.
You know, perhaps.
Maybe recovered for a while. Maybe looked elsewhere for different things.
Yeah.
Etc.
Also, speaking of, you know, the title of I Would Never Stop You and I Don't Need You to Love Me Back, very similar, you know?
A lot of us have historically not gotten the things that we wanted, either because it was hard to get or because we didn't feel like we could really express what it was that we wanted. Another reason that I think Everything You Want is such an emotional album is because that was first queer relationship, right? Where it was like, oh, it seems like the thing that I'm losing right now is significantly more than all the things that I lost before because I didn't really want those. And this is like, oh, I figured it out. These are the things that I want.
That really comes through, by the way. Like the first queer relationship aspect, like 100%.
I don't know. In the whole, I think there is a theme that runs through a lot of queer and trans music of, I will take what I can get.
Yeah.
Because before I got basically nothing.
God, you're speaking my language. Anyway, I'm not going to cry in this podcast. Let's.
You have upheld a pretty good track record, I will say.
I did cry in the last one, I will say.
I couldn't hear it. That doesn't count.
Okay. Real shit.
One thing we didn't talk about up until now, the visuals, the accompanying music videos that go along with the songs, and when you teased the new single on Twitter with the animation that went along with it. I listened to the album before I had known that there were music videos for the song. Siobhan had told me that during the review.
Oh.
But it really adds like a whole nother level. If anyone's listened to the songs without the visuals, like, I think you're missing out.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the animation adds a lot.
There is an interesting sort of through line through the album, which was like, in order to connect all the narrative elements and some of the videos, there was like a lot of near verbatim recreations of either words that were said or messages that were in a DM. All the stuff at the beginning of the Silence music video was like just actually copied and pasted from a text convo that happened, as well as like several of the interludes on the album were just like, I could like make something up, but like in an effort to not misrepresent anybody's words here, I'm just gonna take directly from the source on this one.
That's why those interludes were so hard to listen to then, because they were authentic.
I think there was probably a little bit of spite in the what was it at the end of Asymmetry into Silence. That one was just a little bit of like, I know someone's going to be listening to this album, and I would really like to see them and listen to their words verbatim put really close together in that context, just to like drive the point home a little bit.
Holy shit. Yeah. I mean, that absolutely landed. Ugh, I just want to be so involved in your life. Oh my God.
Person I dated afterwards, like for most of last year, had listened to that album and was like, this all seems reasonable, actually. And like when that was ending was just like, yeah, I don't think this is going to be a thing much longer. And it was like, that's great. And then also didn't zip immediately and forever. And I had the chance to be like, yes, actually, I think I do prefer it this way.
Direct communication, you know what I mean? It's like,
it's nice.
It's so nice. That's so real.
All the things that might hurt do it for a lot shorter period of time, I find. Like, it's stuff ending is way easier than stuff being on the verge of ending forever.
To refocus us a little bit, as interesting as that was, we have like 4 more tracks to talk about.
Well, if you want to switch to something more upbeat, we do have Ringtone up next.
We do have Ringtone up next, but a little bit of a dark undertone in this song too.
Yeah.
So yeah, Ringtone, again, oops, all hooks. Very, very, very good song. And we've kind of talked a little bit about the remix album.
Oh God, I was waiting for you to mention it.
Yes.
I mean, it is the best remix on that album, I think.
Yeah, hands down.
Is the best remix. I mean, how do you go wrong with like Charlie XCX and Rico Nasty?
Caro Bonito.
There's something very specific about the vibe created on that track that I don't think exists on another song anywhere ever.
Oh, God, and also like again, to kind of talk about like the aesthetics of 100 gecs too, but the music video was really interesting. For the remix in particular, where like for all the features they had, they just held up like little images of who was singing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And they just have this vibe to them where I'm like, both of these people were absolutely scene kids. You know what I mean? Like they got the hoodie, they have that like vibe in the way that they move, and like it's untouchable.
Is it, now this is maybe a little off topic, but does it seem like not necessarily weird, but it interests me a lot that's a becoming an aesthetic that is like there is a whole lot of nostalgia for, even for people that were not there. Like, I think one of the reasons 100 gecs did so well is like, Yeah, the like Y2K era into mid to late 2000s scene kid is like right now for Gen Z and like kids on TikTok and whatever is the same as when I was in high school and there were kids that were like not alive during the 70s or the 80s, but were super into like Guns N' Roses and denim jackets and everything.
Yes, 100%. Yep. That is a fantastic analogy. You know, the scene kids were ahead of their time. They were like very maximalist, which is, I think, an aesthetic that's very popular with younger people, especially like, you know, the TikTok kids, right? The colors, the style, and the fact that they were just unafraid to be cringe. You know, I think that's like another thing.
For whatever reason, we couldn't feel cringe at that time, whether it was via age or just being so immersed in your certain subculture. I feel like a lot of maximalist stuff comes out of that, and it's whether or not I'm into that particular aesthetic or not, I can almost always appreciate somebody that goes all in on whatever vibe it is.
The scene aesthetic was so integral to MySpace too. Like, they were woven together. The whole scene aesthetic from back then was so fucking interesting and cool to me. But again, it was one of those things, you know, you can look, but you can't seem too interested, because if you seem too interested, then people are going to ask questions. So that's definitely one of the making up for lost time things. Like I'm not about to, because I don't have the hair for it. But the scene aesthetic is so interesting to me that back then it was all very black t-shirts, blue jeans, you know, for years. So trying to make up for it now with more of a colorful wardrobe is definitely kind of in an admiration for that style at the time of just like unashamed to be super fucking loud in your style. And yeah, I fucking loved that.
There was a lot of crossover between that and like, especially on the internet, the like scene kid and emo and like Y2K vibes of like rhinestone encrusted pink cell phone bling nonsense.
Yeah.
That I really enjoyed, but also I think at the time there was a combination of, oh, you are a pastor's kid, you're not supposed to be vain or draw attention to yourself. Also, we're kind of poor, so everything you own is navy blue or brown and a hand-me-down or something your grandma bought at a thrift store.
God, that's so relatable to me. And I mean, moreover, like, I think some of the first like trans thoughts that I had, like that I remember from being younger, was like looking at scene girls and being like, God, if I was definitely a girl, I would be that.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
I had like a list, which was like at the top was stripy arm warmers and giant zip up Converse boots that were like,
oh God,
if I were a girl, these were the things that I would wear.
Right. And still cis,
like,
though.
Having that list wasn't like some sort of clue for whatever reason.
God, so relatable.
One of the interesting results of this is that I did not really start developing almost any sense of style until I think late 2016, and then even then didn't get really into it until like 2018, 2019, which was like, you then go into the TikTok era of like, there was the alt/scene sort of fashion crossover of what, like e-girls and punk aesthetics coming back to the point where I think like daily life, I don't do anything particularly interesting, but if I'm going to dress up and go somewhere to like a local show, for example, it is kind of weird that there will be like groups of, you know, 19 to 21 year olds that I aesthetically fit in much better with than like the bunch of millennials that I showed up to the concert with.
Exactly.
Relatable.
But like, also, that does mean that I get to be somewhat fashionable instead of just wearing a bunch of stuff from my high school era that is 100% out of style now. I got lucky enough that somehow some of it managed to come back into into vogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can finally, live the teenage dream, but also be like with it, not immediately like dateable as like, the old gal at the party, so to speak.
Right. Like it was either this or, speaking of rhinestones, like rhinestone butterfly on the back pocket of the bell-bottom jeans.
Oh, hell
weird,
yeah.
Weird Midwestern Y2K 70s resurgence that just sort of anybody who went to high school in that era and didn't continue to develop a style defaulted to.
I think watching Christina Aguilera videos in the early 2000s was like, that was the style I'd wanted, Like, can I please just emulate this? I want this style, please.
It's a very particular aesthetic, and it works well, but I find that a lot of times I see it paired with like a bland zip-up hoodie at a bar.
Oh.
It's like, no, you gotta take that all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't half-ass that.
To bring that back, I think ringtone and the whole vibe that it carries sort of just like emanates that aesthetic.
Yeah, and I mean, do you remember like in the late 2000s when like ringtones were like a big deal?
Yeah,
right?
Right.
You
gotta either
tones.
go on a store or text 99 cents somehow to a place that'll then send you a ringtone.
Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, there were like so many like songs that became popular because they were like
fucking Crazy Frog.
Yeah, it's like kind of the equivalent of like songs will get popular now because they're TikTok sounds.
I think both of them contribute to this need for like a tune to have a very catchy like 3 to 4 seconds.
Yes, like the where the hook clears. Totally agree. Other parts of the song that I relate to is like 45 group texts, 50 group DMs. I don't know about y'all, but I'm in way too many group chats, and it's like really hard for me to keep up with all my messages. So like the idea of like getting home and then not like calling your significant other because you're like catching up on all of your group like text messages is like very relatable to me.
I'm overwhelmed by the idea of a group text. I usually don't really do them too often, and I don't really hang out on the servers too much because I get very overwhelmed. But I can't imagine just having a whole bunch of them. That does sound exhausting.
Yeah.
There's basically, I had to at some point make sure my friends know, I'm going to keep up with this Discord and any personal messages. And if you send anything else in a group message that it might be important, you should probably just tell me because there's a chance I'm going to miss it.
So real. Yeah. Like I have to have a Discord server for my like for streaming, but I always feel bad about, people who like me that join that because it's like, I'm sorry, like work for a living a lot of times, and I'm in 3 relationships, and I have a lot of really close friends like Moth, and those take priority over my Discord server. I'm so sorry. Like, I'll be in here sometimes, but the other thing that's interesting about ringtone, I think, is that like undercurrent of like it's kind of like the partner that the female voice is talking about is kind of like weirdly obsessive and gross, right? And that really comes through on the remix where they like add, Rico Nasty's part, which like makes it very clear like what the subtext of the song is, And then the next song on the record is Gek Gek Gek.
Gek Gek Gek. Sure.
Yeah. Which
another one with a lot of sound effects.
Yes, a lot of sound effects. And I would really describe this as almost like an electronic freeform jazz song, like as much as that's even possible, just because it's like no structure, weird random shit. Microsoft Sam just saying Gek 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 over and over again.
Hell yeah.
In like a different rhythm from the rest of the song.
I love discordant shit so much. Like, the fucking weirder and harder to follow it is. This is like, yes, please.
I just think there's a lot to be said for things that just put stuff together. If somebody handed you the aux cord on a road trip, you could not start with this song and hold on to the aux cord for very long.
You gotta build up to this one.
But just like having it be there in between Ringtone and Hand Crushed by a Mallet, I don't know, it's like a reset of your expectations.
100%, yeah. And it's also the song that most illustrates, like, in preparation for this, I was like looking up how the record was made, and like a lot of it was done via email, apparently. Like Dylan Brady was in LA and Laura Les was in Chicago. So when they recorded a lot of this record, they were actually just emailing, like, you know, sound bites and like things that they were working on to each other and then mixing it together. And that's like
wild.
Yeah, that especially comes through on this song, where it does sound like two people just kind of throwing everything into a blender. But it is really fun, I must say.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for these. I'm a sucker for $1 million on 10,000 gecs. Just when it's just a bunch of shit just together. I fucking love that shit.
This one, like, I Need Help Immediately and this one don't necessarily stand up as much to repeat viewings or listens, but the first time I heard them, it did increase my interest in the album pretty dramatically, just to be like, oh, I don't know what's going to come after this.
Also, I mean, that comes through if you look on Spotify, like on the plays. Every song other than these two and Get to You don't break 10 million listens, and these I Need Help Immediately and Get are the two that are least listened to, because I think a lot of people end up skipping them, unfortunately.
Like, it's still kind of amazing to me that they average out to have about 5 million listens each.
It's insane. Yeah. The fact that this is so popular is like truly unreal.
Now, speaking of the remix album, Siobhan, can I just ask for a second?
Okay.
What was your reaction when you saw Fall Out Boy on Hand Crushed by a Mallet?
Okay. My reaction was, so I'm like a huge Fall Out Boy fan. I was floored. Well, I was floored. I was not totally surprised, because Patrick Stump, like, has a years long reputation of like, he'll be on anything, you know. Like he has like a million different features, you know. I was actually a lot more surprised by Craig Owens being on that song. Are either of you familiar with Chiodos?
Oh,
that is one of those bands that most of the people I knew in high school listened to. So I heard it in like their cars, but I never owned a Chiodos album.
Same.
Yeah. Craig Owens was one of the girly voice skinny boys that I was like absolutely obsessed with in high school. Still cis though.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I was like completely, like, I had not heard of that man in like a decade. At that point, I was like, he's still alive, you know, because like the last I had heard from him, he was like, now he's a very problematic guy. Like I like his music, but he's not a good dude. But the last I heard from him was like in 2012. He was like begging people on the revenge porn site Is Anyone Up to pay for his phone bill. So I was like, yeah.
What?
So I was like, this man is still alive and like got this like feature, and he sings like most of the song.
That is interesting.
But also this song is really good. I think it's probably one of my favorite, especially lyrically. I think it's like quite like complex and interesting. The like visual of like crushing your hand with a mallet is like so visceral. Emo in like the dark sense, where like it's, you know, like blood on the dance floor, like, you know, like talking like very like openly about like sort of gory imagery, which was like a big thing in like the emo like scene community at that time. Like I remember on Tumblr there used to be like dedicated blogs that were literally just gore blogs that would post like graphic like gore imagery, and like the scene kids would fucking eat it up. So it's like interesting to like also kind of like for 100 gecs to like tip their hat to that element of it as well.
In my 2020 top songs, this was like the number 2.
Yeah.
Or maybe 3. But it was up there, and I listened to this one a lot.
Yeah, it's really good. And it also, like, the way, like, the chorus speeds up so much, it has this, like, descent to madness feel that I find really, really interesting.
It does, and it also has that, like, drop to halftime when it actually hits. That was, I don't know if you can tell or not, but one of the other, like, big inspirations for me in terms of, like, you know, how do I want my music to be in terms of structure?
The composition is like really, really like interesting. It's, you know, for like songs off this record, it's not often like remembered in that way, but I really, really fucking love it.
I think there's a lot about this album where it's like, it is very clearly inspired by a certain era, and I wouldn't necessarily call anything on here dubstep, like necessarily, but also it is not in any way a surprise that they later collabed with Skrillex on a track.
I remember that guy from like when he was a teenager in From First to Last. Like,
yeah, that's certainly a name of a band.
Yeah. Also, just really interesting for like him to be in such like a post-hardcore like screamo band, and then to make it huge playing dubstep, you know what I mean? But also like dubstep has this interesting like history as well, where it kind of comes from that like hardcore like or metalcore like sound that then develops into like electronica.
There was a whole era where there was like some major crossover there. The primary one that I usually think of is Attack Attack, I think.
Attack Attack was huge, 100%, and big with the scene kids too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Actually, have I mentioned my connection, my weird small connection to Attack Attack?
No, and you must.
There was a time in whenever it was, I was in a band in like 2014, and in 2015 we were like, our drummer was in and had represented several bands that recorded with Johnny Frank, like the original keyboardist of Attack Attack.
Wow.
And we were like, all right, well, he's a really good producer. Let's go produce a track. And then at some point ended up being Johnny Frank worked with Jared Alonji, who needed a vocalist for like a satire album. And our vocalist got recommended. So I ended up doing like, I don't know what it was, like over a couple months, just a bunch of online vocal engineering sessions with Johnny Frank recording our vocalist for that album.
Oh shit. That's fucking crazy.
It is. I've had a bunch of weird like brushes with people from my old high school scene that's been kind of weird but interesting. Have you listened to Bill Murray at all?
I don't think I have, actually.
If you haven't, that's like Johnny Frank's current project, like Bilmuri. I did like 1 or 2 music videos back in the day when I was doing primarily video stuff for people. And honestly, better than most of the stuff Attack Attack put out like post their second album.
Okay, yeah. I will absolutely check it out. And it's also interesting to hear you say that too, because like I can like hear a lot of those connections, especially in your self-titled record. It does seem like influenced by a lot of like emo rock, especially.
Yeah, my 2 primary bands prior to doing like mainly solo stuff was like very A Day to Remember inspired kind of easycore.
Hell yeah.
And then another band that was basically just trying to be either brand new or perhaps Hawthorne Heights. And those were like the two places I have the most compositional experience in.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And also probably one reason why your music resonates with me so much, because I like grew up on that shit. You know, that was like...
It was a good era.
It was a good era. It's sad that most of them are pedophiles, but you know, that is you get what you get, I guess.
As far as I know, we're still cool with the Day to Remember, and also they're going to be like 10 minutes for me next month.
Oh shit!
That's sick.
I know, with 4 years strong and the story so far, and I don't know if I'm going to like be able to afford to make it, but I'm definitely going to hear about it from everybody I know.
Yeah. God, that is a fucking hell of a lineup too.
It is, especially for one to be coming to like a town more than an hour outside of Minneapolis.
It's wild you mentioned that, because Spotify also told me that that Hawthorne Heights was going to be touring again, and it's just like, I don't know how they're all going to sound like 20 years after their big albums.
Like, my band got to open for Hawthorne Heights once.
Damn.
What?
We actually, we played, no, we played Warped Tour one time. We played,
Holy shit.
We were like the special choice for the Ernie Ball stage one year, which means we got to play before most people even made it through the line, like first band at 8 something a.m. But it was still like one of the coolest experiences.
Wow. Okay. I must say, B, your lore continues to impress.
It's complicated. And the reason that we don't talk about many of those bands is also the reason we don't talk about that band.
Okay. Yeah. Real shit.
Me and the drummer managed to bail before the whole thing exploded.
Well, it seems like you're doing just fine for yourself, if I do say so myself.
I do my best.
Now that I'm on Spotify, I was not aware of the name Bill Murray, but I have listened to Goblin Hours actually very recently.
It's very good. There is a recent EP that came out that is like the strangest combination of like incredibly heavy guitar riffs, but also like R&B vocals and some country riffs that should not work as incredibly well as they do.
Yeah, I mean,
I love a nice hodgepodge.
Yeah, I believe that though, because I think that punk and country are very similar, like in their composition, and that's why, like, I don't know if either of you have ever listened to like the Men Singers, but like most of the stuff they make today is like basically country, but they started out as like an East Coast like punk band, which is really interesting.
There's a very interesting crossover between like pop punk and pop country share the same pop elements and actually blend really well. And for whatever reason, as Fall Out Boy has shown us, if you throw R&B vocals in there, those also work really well too for some reason.
Yeah, real shit. Okay, so we got one track left, which is Geck to You, which is kind of a ballad.
I like it as a closer.
Yeah, it's a really good closer, I'd say. And, you know, the remix record had Dorian Electra on it, which was great.
That's the version I'm more familiar with, yeah.
Or as the drop said, Dorian Agektra, which was really fucking funny.
And the music video, they're pissing on phones, so that's great.
We love that, yeah. And, yeah, there was, like, one part of that music video where like they put a bunch of like coins on a cookie tray and then put it in the oven, and then they pull it out and it's like a bunch of like old like, you know, rhinestone like cell phones like you were talking about earlier.
They're throwing money in the oven.
Throwing my money in the oven. Yeah.
It's full circle.
Exactly.
This was one of them that was another, I think, like big connection for me at the time, because it was very applicable to a lot of the stuff that was going on. There was a whole lot of, I think there's like definitely a in a relationship vibe to this one, which is not necessarily what my 2020 was about. But there was a whole lot of me and my friends are all surviving together, and like everything is kind of a mess and a disaster, but that's, you know, that's fine, actually. Things are remarkably better than they were, you know, 5 years ago, and we're all still together and friends and have food and places to live, which was, you know, not an easy thing for everybody in 2020.
That's so true. Especially like, you know, a lot of my friends at the time were in like service jobs and like, you know, were like laid off for various reasons. Like it was a rough time for sure. And I think that this song does capture that feeling of like, you know, being alone and like needing someone to like be around, you know? Can you get to me now, right?
It was important at the time for me and the people that I was hanging out with at the time to communicate and realize like, yeah, it is difficult and it's actually, you know, we all need each other, but also, you know, we all have each other currently versus how it was previously. I don't know. You can hear a lot on like the album I put out at the end of 2020, early 2021. That's like has very similar vibes of we're all kind of just doing whatever, but we are together. And that's definitely, I don't know, the more important part rather than everything being perfect. I think it sort of plays into this thing where anybody after like Gen X just didn't get to live the normal adult life that everybody was sort of promised at some point.
Yeah, real shit.
And I think this album in this era and part of this song in particular was, at least for me, part of the process of realizing, oh, it's actually just different for us. We have different standards. And just because we're not, you know, living the life that we were promised doesn't mean that everything is a disaster all the time. Actually, here are the things that are more important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really beautiful, and that's also very true. Yeah, where I think, you know, we're in a generation where we're kind of the first people who had to really grapple with that, you know, that like the quote unquote American dream is like well and truly dead, where like, you know, will any of us ever own a house? It will be, you know, it's yet to be seen, right? But prospects are not good.
There's like a generation of kids who never had it. And then there's another generation of people who could see it and could almost touch it and then just had it sort of evaporate.
Yeah. Oh, 2008. What have you wrought? I think the last thing that I'd just generally like to talk about, especially, you know, with some of the themes of this podcast, is the influence of like Laura Less on as far as like trans feminine, you know, musicians, in particular like the pitched up vocals being like a big part of like a lot of like trans feminine music that's come out since 100 gecs, and how that's become kind of like a really like big cornerstone of like, you know, the soundscape, right?
That is one of the elements where I was like, oh, this is a thing that's acceptable to do. And along with like the, you know, auto-tune and or any whatever type of pitch correction you want to use, made me realize like, oh, I don't have to work so super hard at, you know, the parts of this that might either give me dysphoria or cause me to want to give up on what I'm making. If there's a bit of a crutch I got to lean on to get this thing out the door, that's, you know, not actually a big deal.
Yeah, and I mean, arguably, it sounds amazing. It sounds like incredible, and like I think it's become like a big part of like the culture, you know, which I like in particular because I mean, before this, like I think the biggest like trans femme like musician was Sophie, who really did not do that. Like Sophie just had that voice, you know, as far as I can tell. But that does require like so much like training, even beyond just voice training. I mean, like the voice you use when you're talking and the voice you use when you're singing are different. They actually come from like totally different parts of your brain too, which is I think really interesting, where like you can voice train your speaking voice, but then you also have to separately voice train your singing voice, which is very, very difficult, you know?
One of the things that I thought might have helped, like back when I first started looking into the idea of voice training, which I still haven't really done much of because of like, it's super hard to get an appointment or a reference or anything, at least in the current healthcare system locally. But I remember thinking, oh, I've sung for so many years, it should be easy to do. And it is way more complicated than just being able to tune a few things about your voice. Not that it doesn't help. It does help, I think. But I also think that overall, social acceptance of stuff like autotune and using a bunch of samples and I'm just really for whatever can break down barriers between artists, specifically independent artists, having cool ideas and then actually getting it to other people's ears. Like, there isn't really any need to be gatekeepy with, like, I've been in music scenes long enough to see a lot of people say, like, oh, well, it's not real music if you didn't write and record all of it yourself, or if you used any particular assistance to get your stuff done.
Yeah, I mean, look, the only real music is when you play a drum beat in a cave with the 30 to 50 people you live with in your hunter-gatherer community, and that's real shit, okay?
Right. And you're not DIY unless you've constructed all of your own microphones and written your own DAW software and /or constructed your own reel-to-reel tape machine, which you use to record all your music.
I'm only just now kind of getting into trying to consciously voice train more often, just to kind of make it a thing that, I want to be consistent about. And it's funny, we talk about trans feminine artists that we're into. I think the first one that I really got into is Kim Petras, which sets a really impractical goal to aspire to.
Yeah,
because just this like naturally sounding like, oh yeah, okay, that's a unremarkable bar to set.
Oh my god, yeah. I mean, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't she like transition as like a child?
I think she was 15. Yeah,
15. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, anybody who got to go on hormones or blockers before puberty started really doing this thing. Comparing yourself to them is going to be a bad time.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, like, also, thank goodness, some people did not have to go through some of the things that some of us had to go through.
It's nice that, like, women like that are more common, in our world. And, like, hopefully, we can continue to do the work to make that possible for people to be that way. The trans girls that are growing up now or, like, yet to be born, right? In the same breath, we have the cards that we've been dealt. And you know what? I gotta say, both of y'all's voice is fantastic and lovely. So, no worries.
The same goes for yours.
Well, thank you. Not to hug box y'all right at the end or anything, but
I figured we would eventually.
I do think that's an important thing to accept.
Yeah, I think so too. I must say, B, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Definitely.
It was lovely to talk to you about this record, as well as your music and your experiences and things like that.
Yeah, it was fun to get to discuss some stuff.
You just released a track on Spotify. We talked about it a little bit.
That's true. I did do that.
Be sure to check out I Don't Need You to Love Me Back on Spotify. I'm also...
Which does have a bit of that weird MySpace naming convention that we talked about.
That you've come to know and love. Yes.
Yes. Very, very cool.
But if you search Happy Birthday, Mr. Baskets, you will eventually find it. Which does remind me, my friend Mr. Baskets has a birthday coming up in 2 days.
Oh,
which
really?
Means it's the 4-year anniversary of that first album.
Whoa.
Oh my god. I love that. I gotta say too, I Don't Need You to Love Me Back is probably the song that got onto my on repeat the fastest from release to getting onto my on repeat. So thank you for that.
I'm glad you think so.
Yeah.
I am just kind of trying some things now, and it is encouraging to see people responding to me just putting out some stuff.
I'm also, a little blue birdie told me that you're also making a game. Is that right?
I am. I've been taking a break for like a week, so I should get back to that soon. But we've got like a fairly solid base for my little... Gosh, there's a bit of lore to it. Last year I did a music video for the Living Tombstones remix of Andrew Gold's Witches. 30% of the comments were like, I wish I could actually play this. So I was like, well, I know how to make a video game, so I might as well. So there is, if anybody wants to give that a little bit of a test, there is a Patreon where there is currently a demo and there will be an updated one shortly. Otherwise, if you know, racing, if cyberpunk racing witches seems like your kind of thing, there is also a my Twitter, which you can see some of the stuff. There's also a TikTok, both Videomancer, and hopefully before too long, probably in the next couple of weeks, I should have a Steam page up so you can wishlist it.
Ooh, very nice.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling like this like cis woman that I work with that, you know, like, because I was playing some of your music like on the aux, and I was like, oh yeah, also like they make they're in the process of making like a witch on broomstick like kart racer game, and she was like, oh my god, I have to play this, and I was like, stay tuned, you know. So there's absolutely a demand for it.
Hey.
Yeah, I was surprised about that, actually. That's kind of been my my video game making career has been mostly there's this weird crossover between cultural zeitgeist and the things that I like making. I'd better hop on this train quick.
I would also love to stream it if you would be down for that.
As soon as there is something that is playable without me sitting over your shoulder making sure you don't push any of the wrong buttons to break it, okay. I will let you know.
Sounds good. Stay strong, bitches.